You want to give a few a minute to join? Yeah, I would say let's go ahead and get started. Were you going to be the moderator, Katie, this time around, or that's how I had it? I don't think
Sorry, me?
Yeah, I think right. That's how we had it, I believe. None that it matters.
Oh, sure. I'm happy to be the moderator. I'm not sure I have everything up that I would need to. Sorry about that.
No worries. I guess I can go ahead and sort of start chatting. So this is the July champion hours. We haven't had as many, I don't think, questions submitted this time as previous. So some of the questions we may be covering might be from previous. Didn't actually make it through everything there, but given that, like I said, it is a little. We didn't have as many submitted this time. So if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask about Adobe Analytics or anything Adobe related while we're here, I guess, within our purview, feel free just to drop it in the chat and we'll get to that as well. I think we'll definitely have time for that today. Otherwise, we may be a little shorter one. I think it's also worth pointing out, I may mention this again at the end, that we're probably not going to be having one of these Champions office hours for August. Just changes and transitions in the Champions program a little bit in that period of time. So they'll probably pick back up in September. So I don't know, Frederik, Catherine, Katie, if you guys have had a chance to look at the list of questions or anything like that, but I may let someone else take a shot at this first one, which I have, which was this is asked by Karthik H, who I don't know if they're on or not.
Should I maybe go ahead and share the screen, or
sure,
Katie,
yeah,
do you have it?
like.
All right, just pull it up there, not to steal anyone's stage, but do you see that now, or very creative question?
Yeah, I can see it.
Right.
Yep.
Did we mention the recording already?
Oh, well, it looks like we are recording.
Well,
so
we are,
for posterity's sake. Oh yeah, thanks for mentioning that as well, Frederik. I guess this will be up on a YouTube channel as well. I don't know if it's already posted in the. Yes, Mandy already posted that and pinned it to the top of the chat as well, just for reference.
Oh yeah, so. There it is. True, just posted it again for good measure. So, who wants to moderate? Should I just go through it, or Katie, do you want to read it out?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to read through it. So,
right.
The question is about the attribution model. I think capabilities for visitors and critical options. So I think I'm happy to dig into this too. But Frederik, I think I can hand this over to you. I don't know if the way that you interpreted this was kind of more generally around models and the use of them from a campaign perspective. But take it away, and then I can do a
No,
follow-up.
you don't need to. Like, let's do the other way around. Like, let's start with you, and then I can go through whatever I have in here. And like, I can be your keyboard and mouse. If you tell me where to click, I can also do that.
Awesome. So we talked about attribution models a little bit in the June session. I know there were some questions, and I think there's actually one of them that remains maybe a little bit further down on the dashboard. There were some questions around the available models. There was one specifically around a U-shaped attribution model. And so we talked about this from an attribution IQ perspective. It might be worth us kind of showing that on the screen for anybody who hasn't seen that. I'm not sure if Karthik's been able to join us, but I would say that if you look at your, and sorry, could you scroll up just a tiny bit? So it looks like we have media streaming, media campaigns here. And what I generally do when I'm looking at attribution, from a visitor perspective and kind of understanding how visitors are placing orders and how that might be different if we were to shift the attribution model. I think you can look at this a couple different ways. So sometimes I'll look at it from a marketing channel perspective to see how it's impacting kind of the marketing channel in aggregate. And there's a couple different ways to do that, but looking at the campaign itself, how many orders it drove, and then really trying to kind of adjust that to essentially, think about it from different perspectives in the way that it actually does happen. And then also in an attempt to kind of project how that might be different in the future if you were to focus things like investment or effort in a different way, I think is typically how I approach it. So I think including marketing related or media related campaign attributes at whatever level of granularity you have them, and then thinking about orders is a really cohesive, straightforward way to do it. And I don't know if we want to kind of pull the drop down for attribution IQ and show some of the options against the orders. Hopefully that is helping to kind of give some guidance and answer the question. But I'm happy for anyone else to contribute. But just to look at the models, in my experience, you generally look at last touch as almost like a default attribution model. So I think it makes total sense that it's at the top of the list there. Another one that I really like to utilize, and we talked about this a little bit in June, is participation models. So really looking at, once someone is going through their journey, if they've entered, the site experience from a particular channel or through a particular campaign, how does that influence where the order takes place in the context of that journey? That feels like a pretty effective way generally to look at that. But you have a whole variety of different attribution models that you can apply at a metric level in the context of this feature. So I will pause there in case anyone wants to contribute to that.
I'm going to go last. So, Catherine, do you want to go into any more detail, maybe?
No, I think you've pretty much covered it, Katie. Just to call out, there's a lot of documentation on there, going over all of these different channels. So if one of them sounds interesting to you, just calling out that there's a lot of stuff on Experience Leak for this.
And for anybody who's not super familiar with the UI itself, I see that Gail has commented on being new to Adobe Analytics. There's a lot of options when you're right-clicking on something just from a functionality perspective. So, you can look at it from dimensions and metrics and segments in the left rail. For sure, you can also right-click and drill down, but from an attribution IQ perspective, right-clicking on the field is a pretty quick way to be able to access all of the different drop-downs. Or actually, I think it's actually left-clicking on the gear in this instance, but lots of different options from a usability perspective.
Exactly. Yeah. And just to also go into a little bit more of the detail behind how Adobe Analytics does all that magic, because like when we usually think about attribution, it's always from a marketing perspective. Like one of the like most amazing things I would say about Adobe Analytics is that you can apply attribution modeling and all that to anything. So if you want to use your pages, for example, and see which of your pages contribute to your like checkout performance, or like which products contribute to like a certain set of orders and all that thing, you can just use any dimension, any metric to do that. And also for that, I've dragged this, albeit empty, but still, this panel in here that you can find under the list of panels. There you have the attribution panel, which also gives you some indication of what you can do, because this is just, I think, a really nice and quick way in the interface to be like, all right, I want to use my online orders, and then you can just use any dimension you like as your channel. Like you can use something like week if you like to. I wouldn't know why you want to do that, but it's there. You can do that. Like page types, like device types, whatever you would like to use for your attribution, and then really quickly just select all the models that you want to have. So if you want to do participation and same touch, you can just check all of those, and it will build a really comprehensive or really extensive at least table. And yeah, like playing around with the look back window is also cool. One of the like things I shared at a previous summit is also the custom options in there, because you can go really detailed and you can just be like, show me everything that happened like 5 minutes before an order. Like, like for some like UX people, that's like really interesting to see, and like show me all the pages that were relevant like 5 minutes before an order was placed, or 5 minutes before a support ticket was submitted, or whatever it is, whatever metric you're interested in. You can get really flexible with those options here, and I think this panel is just a great way to illustrate some of those, because yeah, getting to all of them at the same time is a little bit hard with just right clicking, and I find this dedicated panel like really helpful for that. Don't know about you other guys, but yeah, for me, that's a really like accessible and approachable way to play around with it, because yeah, you can just play around with it. It's all non-destructive, retroactive, and all the fancy buzzwords to show that you can just play around with it safely. So yeah, a really cool feature. Don't know if the request is actually in chat right now, so we can ask them. This answers the question. Doesn't look like it, but yeah, if you see this on YouTube, you can feel free to comment and post more questions if you like. Right. Shall I just slowly scroll further down, or?
Yeah, I think that sounds like a good plan.
All right. So, next question then.
Yep. What is the easiest way to tell the page that a specific custom link occurred on? And I don't think I'm seeing who asked the question here, so I don't know if anyone who's attending.
I think we answered maybe something similar last time, but there are a couple of different approaches. Number one, and the one that I would probably recommend, is a custom implementation, essentially, where on the click of a link of interest, you essentially you have two options. One is to immediately fire a server call to Adobe Analytics that has the name of the link and the page on which it took place, and you put those in a couple of evars or a couple of props. You could concatenate them into one evar or prop, just depending on how wordy or lengthy that value is, and then just use classifications to break it apart, essentially. That's probably the best option, because you have kind of two ways to look at doing that. Number one is if you have something like a single page application where someone clicks on a link, or a drop down menu that opens that's interactive that doesn't necessarily take someone to a subsequent page, you need that server call to fire right then. So you could have that in a rule that fires immediately. The other option is you could also do the same implementation from an evar prop event standpoint, and essentially cookie it basically. And then on the subsequent page, when someone lands, you set the link that they clicked on and essentially the previous page that they were on. The benefit of that is that Adobe charges you based on server call volume. So if you start firing everything when someone actually clicks on the link before they go, you're effectively doubling your server calls. So it is worth keeping in mind and not maybe necessarily doing that in all situations. So that would be my recommendation. The other option is Activity Map, which can be enabled in the admin console. So you're going to need someone there to do it. It's pretty much a simple button just to enable this reporting. And you're going to look for it here and you're not going to find it, I don't think. I don't believe it's enabled here, funny enough, in our thing. So maybe it is. But I have a workspace pulled up where I did this last time recently in a different place. But okay, yeah.
So where is it again?
It's under general, so it's not there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's blacked out there.
Yep.
So I can share my screen if you want, because I do have it up in a different sandbox where I did this. If you want to stop screen sharing, then I can maybe.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're all good. All right. Okay, so back to where Frederik was in the report suite section. I'm going to answer another question that was also in the chat here as we do this. So I think it's one of these. I don't recall which one. Maybe I don't have the ability. Look at that. Apparently, I don't have the ability to do it here either. Great. But I'll show you where it is here in a second either way. But once you enable it, and I'll show you where that is anyway in just a moment in a different place. But once you enable it, you will have, well, basically I will say this. Activity Map works in the same way that I mentioned earlier about the tracking where it sits on the next page. So when someone clicks on a link, it will fire Activity Map link, Activity Map page, which essentially is going to set the hyperlink text that someone clicked on the previous page, and it gets set on the subsequent page. So this is not necessarily the solution for something like a single page app in this case, but this does answer the question of, on the home page, people were clicking. These are some obviously very generic link examples here, but on the home page, this is what they were clicking, right? And the number of times that it occurred. And to answer the question that was in the chat from Christopher, I did check, and in the situation where I did have access to, let me just change this real quick, so I can get to a place where you can see this. Change the you cannot change the names of the variables for this. So let's see. So here it is. General. Oh, look. Frederik,
is it on my side or?
So
here you go. Activity Map report. Maybe it was. Maybe I just spoke too quickly. But and there is a button here called where you
enable Activity Map reports. You just push this button.
I think, Jason, you're breaking up a little bit, at least for me.
There's no way that I can tell to.
Others are nodding, so.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So I was like, is that my stupid German internet again? All right, glad it isn't.
All right.
I'll jump in just for 1 second, if you don't mind, Jason, and just mention the only way that I've generally, the only way that I've really seen any of the data within Activity Map adjust itself essentially is how the content management system is generating text within the data layer. So I have seen this at one prior company where we were actually seeing some of the custom text come through based on the configuration. I'd have to kind of dig deep into the recesses of my mind to think about like how we actually instrumented it in a way where that was populating within the reporting. But we did have the ability to see that. And then it's been a long time since I've looked at it, but within the Chrome extension, we were able to make kind of some comparisons in terms of like what we were seeing on the page and then kind of translating that into some of the reporting we were seeing based on what was coming through. So I think in terms of out of the box, it's pretty kind of specific in terms of how it's implemented, but I think there are some ways to kind of customize that setup that might give you like a little bit of a different level of granularity or kind of custom data that's coming through that might make it slightly more digestible depending on what the user role is for who's looking at the dashboard itself.
Yeah, and I would add, if you can hear me, that kind of like you were saying, Kate, you can, there is the out of the box implementation of Activity Map where it just passes what they clicked on. It's pretty basic. You can alter in the app measurement code, what you pass for Activity Map region and link. Those are customizable. So I think there are HTML parameters you can even add to links typically that you might use to like change and force those values to something more custom.
Very true. And also just to add a few more cents to that, I just shared a link to a blog post in the chat as well, where I've tried out some of the options to customize Activity Map, which is just what you just said, Jason. Also, just to mention that again, because I like the feature so much, what you can also use without any implementation changes is attribution IQ. So by default, like if you have an like custom link event, whatever it is, so for example, this like demo event right here, like you won't see any pages, so it's all 0 here. But as soon as you change the attribution model of that, so I'm going to disable and enable it again, you can use something like last touch visit. So this will just pull in the last page that was tracked before that link click occurred. And usually that is the page on which that link click occurred. And you can then see it's just going to pull in all those numbers here. And that way, if you have a custom event already firing on your link clicks, then you can also use attribution IQ to just retroactively, without any implementation changes, pull it in. But especially with things like users browsing on like multiple tabs and all this kind of, all those kind of complications, it can be a little bit fuzzy around the edges. So something like Activity Map, or also, of course, a custom link or custom page dimension rather, that fires with every link click is, of course, the best way from an implementation side. Just also to go into that other question a little bit, into renaming those dimensions, that's something you can do with virtual report suites. So one thing I generally recommend, even if you don't want to do any changes to anything at all, as soon as you create a report suite physically, you should always also create one virtual report suite on top of that. So you just have the option to rename stuff, or also like do some changes to that virtual report suite. And in there, I think you can also rename components, and that's one way you can change that, at least within that virtual report suite, if you want to do that. All right. Any further comments to that point? Nice. Then back to you, Katie, for the next question.
Right. Yes. What is a starting place for those who want to use Python to get an Adobe API
Did we
start?
lose anyone, Frederik? I see.
I think if you see a network error, that might be on your end, because for me at least you're breaking up quite a bit now. So
That's just me with my sketchy internet.
I think it might be like Katie and Catherine are both moving and healthy for me. So all right. So at least what I did is I'm just going to take all of those and put them in the chat. So what I tried to do is just assemble some resources on like some tutorials for Adobe Analytics and Python. So those are both the official like documentation for Adobe Analytics, also a repository on GitHub, because one of Adobe's consultants, I'm going to pronounce his name in the French way now because he is actually French. So Julien Piccini, he did a like kind of wrapper around the Adobe Analytics APIs, because some of the stuff in there is like rather complicated to use. So he actually took some time to build a wrapper around that to make it easier to use. That's what I linked in this GitHub repository. Here's the second link, and then also some tutorials how to use that wrapper. And he also has some YouTube videos that are like really good for like introduction how to use his wrapper with the Adobe Analytics APIs. And of course, another bit of self-promotion there to just point to my own blog again, because there's also some Python examples there. And I already see a question in the chat about like natural or organic Google search data. So there's actually a example on the blog how to pull organic Google search data out of Google Search Console with Python, and then put that into Adobe Analytics. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, that's also in this last tutorial here. And yeah, like depending on, like I've seen a bunch of cases over time where people also want to have like some introduction into Python, and that's of course something that's highly specific to what level you're at, like what you're looking into, like the examples you're looking for. So I think the best we can do is just to point to Google for that kind of thing. Or has anyone a good resource on learning Python in general and also using it with Adobe? No, I see shaking head. So, all right. All right, I don't see any further questions in chat. I think we, at this point, completely lost Jason, so we're just going to move along and see if he comes back with the next question.
So this one is how to track the PWA install for iOS devices submitted by Kamlesh.
Right, I can
Oh, I think
again.
Jason's back too, but go ahead.
There he is.
Yes, and I'm closer to where the internet actually comes in. So,
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
So,
I have fiber internet, but it's on the opposite side of the floor.
Well, cool. So also for this, I'm just going to put those resources into the chat right now. If you're watching this on YouTube, then you can have fun typing off those URLs from the video. But yeah, like I think the change here is that like on many modern web pages, you have the option to do this like progressive web app thingy, where especially on your phone, the website is going to ask you like, do you want to install this app to your home screen? And if you do that, then I think it's just technically like just a link on your home screen to get faster to that website, which opens like in a small browser window or something. And yeah, like tracking those installs can be a little bit tricky. So what I added here are some resources. One is like the first one is how to do that in Google Analytics, ironically, but that has some advice on how to use the native JavaScript resources in the browser, because like when you're in the browser, you can actually detect if the browser is rendering the page within a progressive web app. Like, at least it should be doing that. And that way you can actually know and set a variable that tells you if you are in that progressive web app or not. And what it's also doing is that's this last link specifically. What it's also doing is there is a custom JavaScript event that is being fired once that installation is running, and once the application is actually installing on the phone. And that would be something to check into, and then you can explore how you want to handle that event, but that will give you some guidance on how to actually interact with that. Any additions to that? don't want to always just put my collection of links there and explain what they do, but well,
It's effective. I think it's good.
well, it's German
Nothing
indeed. All right, then if there's no further questions to that, we can move on to the next question.
This question was submitted by Manish. While I can roll from a fixed start date till a further end date, is there a way I can do a fixed end date and a moving start date? For example, my site went live on December 1st, 2022, and I need to compare 3 months after go live to the 3 months before go live, but using dynamic date ranges for both. Is this possible?
Indeed, and my German answer to that is yes. So in the date picker, and also when you create custom date ranges, what you can do is, as you mentioned, you can use rolling dates, and once you click that, you can select something like the start of and end of a current month or current day or whatever you want to do. And what you can also put in both boxes is a fixed day. So you can just go ahead and put a fixed date into both of those boxes, or one of those, or just have, as you said, the fixed end date and then something like a rolling start date. Like that's something you can do. Like I would assume that at some point that might become an issue when you like roll out of the like date range where this kind of logic makes sense. But like in theory, you can do that. And if that's not what you're asking for, what you can also do is you can just make the whole like panel and the date ranges within it relative to the panel calendar. So for example, if you select like 3 months in here, then all the date components that you can use are going to be relative to those 3 months. And if you select different 3 months within a year, then also those date ranges are going to respect that. It gets a little bit confusing because still the naming doesn't change. So it still says something like last month or like 2 months ago, even if it's like relative, and it moves through the calendar. So it might be a little bit confusing to look at. But in general, there's quite some options these days on how to do that kind of thing. And yeah, that's the long answer for my very German short answer, which is yes, you can. Any additions? No, sorry. Well, but the last one is a great discussion question. So
One of my favorite things to talk about, to be very honest with you, as much as I enjoy talking about reporting and the UI, I think these are the things that I like to opine on. Just knowing like what a significant but like solid, investment it is in a lot of these solutions. So if you don't mind, I'm going to take a stab at kicking off what I think is a conversation around this. And then, happy to hand it off to anyone else. So the question request or statement here too is we have to routinely prove the ROI of all of our marketing products. Do you have any tips or tricks to help us prove ROI on systems that don't directly give them, like Adobe Analytics? So I think I'll preface my very long answer here with one thing. In theory, you can get something like Adobe Analytics to provide value realization details. And there's a couple ways to do that, but I'm going to go into that after I start to kind of explain this here. So I think there's a couple of ways to approach the conversation when it comes to this. And I think that can be pretty specific to someone's company or consulting engagement, however you're engaged with the solution. So the way that I typically approach this is from an operational efficiency perspective, and then I like to look at adoption metrics, because I think the value of a lot of marketing tools, aside from visibility into things like channel performance, is the idea that you're getting faster time to insight, that instrumentation can rely on out-of-the-box capabilities, that aside from faster time to insight, you can also have like greater depth of how you're looking at metrics, and then you can also look at things like user adoption and things like that. So my first piece of advice there generally, and how I typically approach this, is to figure out what your baseline and your definitions of those metrics are. So some of the ways that I've looked at this, and I outline it in some of the bullet points here, is like monthly active users as an example, because obviously if you're making an investment in a solution like Adobe Analytics, you want to be able to see that you're driving up adoption in a reasonable way. You want to make sure that you're thinking about investing in the democratization of the data and how you're enforcing things like governance to be able to enable users, because you want people to use the solution that you're investing in. So there's a lot of value in being able to see performance, right? I think you're looking at like revenue, you're looking at like bottom line things, you're looking at behavioral engagement, like all of these things hold value. And in theory, you can say, if we're driving performance and we have visibility into that, that's a value realization within the solution. But if you want to try to quantify it, I typically find that these like operational and adoption type metrics are usually pretty effective to pair with performance. So in the past, the way that I've seen this done is a couple of different things. You can look at just the general user metrics, but we've actually, at a prior company that I was at, taken the user log and actually loaded that into a report suite to be able to leverage the dashboards to look at those types of adoption metrics. Now, I've had a number of conversations with Adobe folks to say, like, wouldn't it be great if this was like a genuine feature, and dashboard and capability? I know there's a lot of things that are coming out in general to be able to like do continuous improvements, especially with the evolution of analytics in the future. But this was one way that we had looked at it previously. And Frederik, I don't know if that is aligned with the link that you sent, but it looks like you sent something about how to monitor the usage for free. So I don't know if you want to chime in there before I continue to opine on the many ways that we could think about value realization.
No, good. But as you say, I just shared one more blog post. So this one is exactly for that kind of application. So you want to monitor your user adoption and what your users are doing over time. And one way to do that is to try and bring that back into Adobe Analytics, which is quite involved because you need to handle all the APIs and all the different kind of things. So this blog post goes into some more details how to do that with Power BI, because like not many people actually know that Power BI is free to use. So anyone can just install that and download that to their desktop and just start using it. So that's pretty cool to just do any sort of like general analysis. And you can just take those logs from Adobe Analytics once you download them manually, put them into Power BI and just start visualizing them. There's also some more advanced stuff here, how to do that with Python, for example, that we have it again, and the APIs, but it also works just manually. So it's just what I wanted to mention there, because you don't need to do it all in Excel. You can also do it halfway automatic in Power BI. So it's just one more thing to share.
Yeah. Great point about efficiency, right? Because if you want to monitor this for efficiency, finding at least a somewhat automated way to be able to do that is another nod to efficiency, right? So that's a great point. And then there were just a couple of other like thoughts that I had there, right? So like, you can do a user survey just in general to get more details and context around how people are having kind of ease of use with the solution. And then we usually use that, or I have used that to be able to kind of contribute to the bigger picture when it comes to the narrative behind some of these data points. So it's a little bit less about the functionality in some ways. It's more about kind of the conversation that this spurs and how you want to be able to use the data to be able to support that. Looking at things like CSAT scores and voice of consumer has also been something that I've considered in the past. I think it depends on kind of the use case and the conversation, but obviously, if you have higher customer satisfaction, you have more visibility into that. That might be something that would be an interesting way for you to, again, add that to the narrative. I think that, like I said in the beginning, like really establishing that baseline and then being able to show progress by having kind of a uniform way of quantifying this over time has been one of the most effective ways that I've been able to support that conversation in my own instances. And then there's just one additional thing that I wanted to throw out there, which was kind of an interesting way that we started to kind of approach things in the past. If you have the value of something that you're being billed for or that you're investing in, right? Like if you have a CPM or a cost of server call or some sort of like quantifiable value, you can use a calculated metric to be able to associate that with an event. So this is something where you like really have to look at the use case and the practical application of it. But if you're saying that an event correlates to a cost for something that you need to consider in the context of your broader investment, that is one way that I've been able to at least kind of directionally quantify the effort that's being put in and then the value of the solution. So again, like highly dependent, not able to like share deep details on that and any practical applications that I've been involved in, but just like conceptually one of the ways that you might be able to think about how you can quantify something that, you know, is typically, it's tricky because like, you know, I can just say like working in a tactical and operational field, like it's hard to quantify things that way. You're not necessarily looking at like, for some, like I launched a feature and now I need to know how much revenue that feature is driving. Like that's like a directly quantifiable way. You know, it's when you're talking about kind of like the instrumentation aspect and some of those things, it's a little more vague in some ways. So that's my very long, passionate narrative about what I think about value realization, but I'm happy to hand it off to the group in case anyone has any other contributions to make.
Yeah, I've got one to add to your very great list that you've got here going, Katie. Um, the Adobe Analytics adoption score is something that we get quoted from our CSM. It's based on your active users, reports, built and scheduled, adoption of the more advanced analytics features like contribution analysis. So some of the stuff that Katie, you've got there on your list already. So that's a great thing that, and they'll trend it over time for you to measure like how if you are introducing initiatives that enable data democratization, so something like an office hours or like a helpline channel, watching that analytics adoption score grow over time as you're introducing these new features has been really cool to see. It's definitely something that I've put on my resume as, you know, a selling point for myself. Um, and then one thing to add, maybe more, we talked about kind of like Adobe Analytics as an analytics tool, but one thing that my stakeholders have found really valuable is when we've enabled or opened the doors to our clickstream data. And one of the KPIs we like to report on is the number of terabytes that are queried from our raw table or your data warehouse. And just the model, the data science models or other applications of that raw data that is enabled through Adobe Analytics that you're bringing to the team.
That's a great point. I would say, like, if you have not connected with your CSM to talk about kind of that scorecard where you can look at adoption and understand all of the different ways that that's maybe considered in the context of that exercise or feature, I would, in support of Kat's comment, I would definitely recommend doing that and having that conversation.
Yeah, it's also a great point to take towards your sales team and be like, do you see how low our adoption is? Do you think we should pay that much? Well, depends on how much you use it, but yeah.
Point. Yeah.
Well, like what I can, like how I like to approach this kind of question is always like in kind of like three ways. Like one point is like, what's the point of even having a analytics program in a company? So like really sit down with your executives, like you're very, like depending on the size of your organization, it might be tricky to do, but really like your high level management and be like, what's the point of all of this? Like what kind of thing do we expect from an analytics program at all? Like why should we spend time and resources and like hiring people, like training people, forcing people to do their own reporting ideally? Like why should we even bother doing this? And that kind of should give you an idea of what the potential in your company is, because especially for small companies, once you just start building that marketing page or whatever it is you might be starting with, like there's very little point to having a analytics solution on your website at all, because what you need is like your Google conversion tags, and then you're pretty much set because that's all you want to do. And at some point, you're going to get to a point where analytics actually makes sense. And at that point, you need to have that conversation in terms of what do we actually expect out of that program, like independent of any tool. And once you know what it is, you can then start thinking about, all right, what justifies Adobe Analytics as a tool. And my usual go-to point is that with Adobe Analytics, you can actually bring all those advanced features like we've seen today, like attribution IQ, which on a technical level is like super advanced, like to be just like, all right, doesn't matter if you like track that event like together with your dimension and all that, because through attribution IQ, you can just redistribute how that's reported and all that kind of thing. Like that's super hard to do in like SQL and all the other like approaches that companies use. So if you have the right setup in place, where, like in my personal opinion, you shouldn't be the one to build all the reports for your business, but they should be able to do that themselves, and they can actually like correlate what they do and all the small decisions they take like each and every day to actual outcomes. Then I think it's pretty easy to justify something like Adobe Analytics, where people don't need to rely on you. Like if you have the right support in place, if you have like the right communication channels and back support and whatever you do in documentation and like distribution lists and all that, like once you actually have all that, I find it very hard to justify anything else besides Adobe Analytics. I'm always like the reason why I like the solution is because there's nothing better on the market to do that kind of thing. Like if you want to do that with Google Analytics, like you need to have Google Analytics, you need to have BigQuery, you need to have your data scientists, and then push them towards Data Studio or Looker Studio, however that thing is called these days, and like wait for Google to deprecate it all again and start over with that. And there's so much time and money you can waste on that. So like that for me is one point where I think the higher like licensing cost is always justified. And then like on that invest side, you need to really like look into how you spend your money. And like if you use Adobe Analytics like you would use Google Analytics and Data Studio, then you're just wasting money, because then you have your analyst build dashboards and build reports for the business. They are trying to like run behind the stakeholders and be like, you should be looking at my report. Like there's so much potential here and nobody's listening to them. They all get frustrated and burned out over time because nobody's actually like looking at what they create, which actually has some value to the business. And for me, that's always like a desperate like need for democratization and like enabling people to do stuff that matters to them on their own. Because again, coming back to what's the point of having like any analytics program at all in your company, like if you expect your people to act on data, they need to be somewhat sufficient in working with data. Like you need to talk to a head of product or head of marketing and be like, what do you expect from your people? Like, do you accept that they take decisions purely based on experience and gut feeling and all that? Or do you actually expect them to work with data and then hold them accountable for that? Because if there's no need in your company to like be self-serviced with data, then you can build all the systems you want. You can build all the reports and like all you want to do, and nobody's going to use it. And they're still going to do stuff purely based on experience or best practices or what they heard on like that one congress or whatever. And yeah, so like I'm always like very, very open to discuss like what's the point of it all, and to just ask that question very broadly and be like, all right, like if there's no need in the company to do analytics and to take data-driven decisions, then we can just don't do it, right? And we can just cancel all the contracts, get rid of it all, and just do conversion tracking in Google Ads. Like that's also an option. Like why should we even bother? That's just me being very like very fatalistic and very German again. But yeah, I always like to ask that question, because if we don't have that buy-in, if we don't have people outside of the analytics team and outside of the analytics organization actually having a need and being held accountable to be working with data, then it doesn't work out in the end. Then you're always going to have frustrated analysts who create amazing analysis and create the greatest of insights. Nobody's going to be interested in that because nobody is actually incentivized to work with the data. So yeah, that's a also very long-winded answer to that. But yeah, it's a very welcoming question for that to just share a little bit. But yeah. At least nobody's disagreeing so far, so I think we all have a point.
I could go on for hours about this, but I'll stop there because we do have some good questions, excuse me, in the chat. So everyone's okay, now that we're at the end of the ones that were captured in the dashboard, I think we can maybe move on to a few of the questions in the chat. And I know there's been some responses to some of them in an active conversation between Gail and Jason. I think I'll probably move on to, I know we talked about Google search, I think a little bit, just scrolling through. So I don't think we addressed this question. And I know that, I do see you still in the attendees. So hopefully you're here to listen to this. But otherwise, again, it'll be on YouTube for the recording. I want to understand how long a customer spends on a single page visit. I made use of the dimension time spent per visit, granular metric, unique visitors, and segment single page visits. I would expect my row sum to equal the grand total as we are looking at single pages and unique visitors. However, they are not. Wondering why this would be the case. The age-old question about how it tallies versus individual line values, but I'm sure somebody else can explain this better than I can, and then I'm happy to follow up in support of that. I see we are already pulling a panel and showing it, so Frederik, if you're the one who's sharing, feel free to chime in.
It's just like I can try and replicate it. So what's the dimension again? Time spent
so
per
it
visit.
is customer spend, single page visit. Dimension is time spent per visit. Metric is unique visitors, and segment is single page visits.
Okay. I don't know. It is very good. Right, now I'm caught up. All right, I just starting building that. So all right, so you are trying to understand in this case where the time spent per visit is kind of distributed. And of course, when you're using the unique visitors metric, as somebody might come to a page many times, they might have one visit where they spend 0 seconds. 0 seconds is hard to achieve, but like between 0 and 30 seconds, and then also other times where they come back and have other time on page. So what I would recommend to do instead is use a similar scope metric. So in this case, that would be visit, because I'm not mistaken. That segment looks like the standard segment for single page visits. So this should now be like probably pretty clean of any duplicates, because this is the time spent per visit, and this should now be without any overlap, because within one visit you can only have one time spent per visit, but for one user you can have many of those. And if you come back many times for only one single page view, then you can be in many of those line items here.
And then we have a follow-up question, and then I don't know if the original requester has anything additional they want to ask about that. But so chances are these visits with 0 to 29 seconds could be bots? ?
Well, it depends. Like the most consultant type of answer you can give, but like if this would be a marketing landing page and you're like pulling some very cheap traffic from display advertising or something to your page, then you will have a lot of bots. So that might be an explanation, but you will also have a lot of people who actually don't want to be on that site and don't have any interest in it. So even if they are human beings, they might just not be interested in it. This is demo data anyways, so this is just like some random generated data that we're looking at, so don't take those numbers seriously. Don't think this behavior is very like realistic anyways. But yeah, it could be bots, could also be other things, so really depends.
Yeah, and just to build off of that too, I think if you're correlating additional metrics to this with a hypothesis that it could be a bot, you'd look at a variety of things, right? You look at time spent, which I think is an interesting one, obviously, but if there's 0 orders, if your conversion rate is extraordinarily low because it's an influx of traffic that's happening, and I think that's the low quality traffic or cheap comment there, but there's a couple different ways to correlate it. Also looking at domain, saw something interesting the other day about consumer ISPs and how you typically wouldn't see bot traffic from them, but there are definitely instances and use cases by which someone would do that. So like kind of correlating all these things, looking at things that are like in and out of DMA, depending on your instance, like those are all ways that you'd probably want to firm up your hypothesis as opposed to just time spent. But yeah, to support what Frederik's saying, yeah, it could be that somebody who spends very little time is either disinterested, was directed there in a way that they were not anticipating, or it could be a bot.
Exactly. I also see one more follow-up question. So there's a question: time spent per visit to be available aren't a minimum of 2 analytics requests required, and that's true. And that's why we're using the single page visits segment. And a single page visit in Adobe Analytics is when you only have one page name for that whole visit. So it's different from a bounce, which would be just one server call, just one event happening in that visit. So there's actually a opportunity there to have within one single page visits many link clicks, for example, or exit links, or like whatever other type of event there is. As long as there is only one page name that is being tracked for that whole visit, it's a single page visit. And you're correct. If this would be a bounce instead, then we wouldn't have any time spent, because we don't have anything to correlate that time on the page with. All right. It was nice and impromptu, and I think we are already at time, right?
Yeah, so there's a couple more questions. I know we said that we're probably not going to have another office hours for the rest of the summer and follow up in the fall, but I think we could probably capture these and hold on to them for posterity, knowing that we have 2 minutes left. But I don't know if anyone has anything else to add before we wrap it up for the day, or if you want to take a stab at the, I think, remaining question ahead of us dropping off the call.
I think it's all good.
Okay.
Scrolling through the chat, but I think it's already been quite a lot of conversation happening around that natural search question, so looks good.
I thought I saw one leftover question.
One question for the
PIM data.
link.
Was it the product data? Did we address that? Whether there was a way to automate the PIM data to Adobe Analytics for product classification?
Oh, really? I didn't even see that.
Kind of buried in there between the,
Yes,
between the
indeed.
answers.
Yeah, in that conversation, yeah. Can we automate the PM data to Adobe Analytics or Pro classifications? Yes, absolutely. So any classifications you want to do for Adobe Analytics, there's many ways to bring those into Adobe Analytics. One is through the API. So that's what most people think of for like automation purposes. So like there's an API that you can use to bring classifications into Adobe Analytics. Like the standard way these days to bring classifications into the tool is also through FTP servers. So once you set up that FTP import for your classification data, you can also use that with whatever system you want to use to provide that data. So depending on what your backend is, where you want to bring the data from, they can certainly create an export to an FTP location or even through the API. So that is very much possible, not just for product data, but also any type of data that is either data sources or classifications.
Got it right in there at 11 Eastern. So I think we're good. And I saw one more question come in, but I think we'll capture that for the follow-up that we have next time. So this has been awesome. I've enjoyed the conversation here. Thanks for all the great questions, everyone. And it'll be on the YouTube if anybody wants to take a look at it after the fact. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Have a great day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.